After getting married, she and her husband decided to leave their hometown and move to a distant land, where they hoped to build a new chapter of their life together. In the first few months, everything seemed perfect. But time has a quiet way of changing things. Airi began to notice the distance between what she had imagined and what she was living. The new land, with its unfamiliar language and customs, made her feel invisible. Her husband, busy adapting to his new job, began spending more hours outside. It wasn't neglect, it was survival, yet the silence between them grew heavier. There were no big arguments, no cruel words, just small misunderstandings that piled up like dust. Loneliness, she realized, doesn't always come from being alone. Sometimes it comes from being beside someone who no longer seems to see you. But even in that quiet sadness, Airi didn't lose hope. She still loved her husband deeply. She just didn't know how to reach him anymore. And then, while writing a letter to her parents back home, she remembered someone, her Uncle Joe. He wasn't really her uncle by blood, but an old family friend who had always treated her like his own daughter. When she was younger, he used to tell her, "Happiness isn't a place you arrive at. It's something you build with your hands every single day." Without much thought, Airi decided to go see him. She needed someone who could listen, not judge, not fix, just understand. Airi didn't tell him everything, only enough for him to understand her confusion. She talked about the quietness in the house, the feeling of being lost, and her fear that maybe she wasn't strong enough for this new life. Uncle Joe listened patiently, never interrupting. When she finished, he simply said, "Airi, when two people start a new life, it's like planting a tree in new soil. The roots take time to grow. It might look weak at first, but it's still alive. You just have to keep watering it." Something about those words stayed with her long after the call ended. It wasn't a solution. It was a reminder that love needed care, not perfection. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel completely alone. She realized that sometimes one kind voice, one act of compassion, is enough to remind us that our story isn't over yet. The following days moved slowly, but something inside Airi had shifted. Her thoughts began to quiet down. She replayed Uncle Joe's words in her mind. Love is like a tree. It grows slowly, but only if you keep watering it. Those words became her small morning ritual. Every day, before her husband woke up, she made a cup of tea, stepped out into the yard, and watched the sunlight touch the leaves. It was simple, almost meditative. The world hadn't changed, but her way of seeing it had. Her husband noticed too. There was a softness in her presence again. Less worry, more patience. The tension that once filled the air began to loosen, though neither of them spoke about it yet. They were still learning how to meet each other halfway. Airi decided she didn't want to keep waiting for things to get better on their own. She started exploring their new town, visiting local markets, learning a few words of the local language, helping an elderly neighbor with groceries. Each interaction reminded her that even in a strange land, kindness was a universal language. The loneliness that once surrounded her began to fade as she let the world back in. One night, while walking home, she passed by a small flower shop tucked behind a bakery. The scent of lily and fresh soil filled the air. She walked in, and the shopkeeper, an elderly woman with a warm smile, greeted her as if she were an old friend. They talked about plants, about seasons, about how caring for flowers requires patience and attention, the same patience that relationships need. Airi left the shop with a small pot of white daisies. She placed it by the window at home, where the morning light was softest. When her husband came home that evening, he noticed the plant and smiled faintly. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's still small," Airi replied, "but I'm taking care of it. It'll grow." He nodded quietly, but something in his eyes softened. It wasn't about the plant. It was about what it represented, an unspoken promise that maybe, just maybe, they could start again. That night, for the first time in months, they shared dinner without the heaviness of silence. They didn't talk about their problems directly. Instead, they talked about small things, the food, the weather, a story he heard from work. It felt ordinary, yet comforting. That weekend, Airi came to say hello to Uncle Joe again. She told him that she was trying to look at things differently, to rebuild each day, each little moment. He chuckled warmly. "See, Airi," he said, "happiness doesn't always come as a grand moment. Sometimes it hides inside ordinary days, the way sunlight enters a window, or the sound of someone saying, 'Welcome home.' You just have to notice it." Those words stayed with her. She began journaling every night, writing down one thing she was grateful for each day. Sometimes it was as simple as the smell of tea or a smile from a stranger. Other times, it was a quiet dinner without tension. Slowly, her journal filled with small blessings, proof that joy still existed even in difficult seasons. The more she practiced gratitude, the more her outlook changed. And when her husband saw her notebook one evening, instead of asking what it was, he simply picked up a pen and added his own line. "Grateful for today's laughter." It was only 5 words, but it carried more weight than any apology. In that moment, Airi realized something profound. Understanding doesn't always come from talking about problems. Sometimes it comes from remembering what once brought you together. And just like that, the distance between them began to shrink, replaced by quiet gestures of care. The home that once felt cold started to feel alive again, with laughter, with warmth, and with the simple joy of trying once more. Change, no matter how gentle, rarely comes without resistance. As Airi and her husband began to reconnect, life tested them once again, not through anger or betrayal, but through something more subtle, the challenge of truly understanding one another. One quiet evening, Airi felt distant from her husband's weary silence. Remembering her uncle's words, "Love grows if you keep watering it," she chose to talk, not blame. Their honest conversation revealed fears, healing the space between them. Later, they rediscovered peace in simply being together. Airi wrote, "Love isn't perfection, but presence, finding each other again, no matter how far we drift." In that moment, she understood something lasting. Even in the stillness of everyday life, there's a kind of love that grows not from grand gestures, but from the courage to keep choosing each other, again and again. As months passed, Airi's home filled with warmth again, laughter, shared meals, quiet peace. The daisies by her window bloomed, mirroring her renewed love. Uncle Joe's letter reminded her, love needs care, not perfection, only growth. Through patience and forgiveness, Airi and her husband found harmony. She realized love isn't a destination, but a daily choice. To listen, to stay kind, and to keep growing together.